Following a 4-month investigation, we have charged a man in connection with multiple frauds originating from the Calgary area. Between April 1st and November 20th, 2013, a man used his moving companies operating under the names SIA Transportation, Stevens Inc., and Anderson International to allegedly conduct fraudulent behavior, including defrauding people and businesses across Canada and failing to pay for goods and services. The man, originally from Ontario, is accused of using his moving companies to collect the personal belongings of his customers, holding them ransom in order to demand additional funds. In some instances, it is alleged he failed to deliver his customers' belongings, keeping them for his personal use instead. Over this same time period, we believe he knowingly paid for goods and services with NSF checks and failed to provide payments for them. In November 2013, we received a call from an employee of SIA Transportation who had concerns regarding the practices of his employer. An investigation led by North District resulted in the identification of 10 victims from within Calgary and other Canadian cities. On January 7th, 2014, the Calgary Police Service, in partnership with Airdrie RCMP, executed search warrants at various properties that led to the recovery of multiple items believed to be obtained through fraudulent activities. Stephen Blondin, also known as Stephen Anderson, 46, of Calgary, has been charged with 5 counts of fraud under $5,000, 1 count of theft over $5,000, 3 counts of false pretense over $5,000, and 1 count of false pretense under $5,000. We encourage anyone who is a victim of fraud to contact the police. Absolutely. This investigation was interesting because this individual was essentially operating as what we could label as a broker, in that he didn't own his own fleet of vehicles or have a physical address for his company. What he would do was he would solicit customers through his website and then make arrangements with them to move belongings like you would typically expect. But then what he ended up doing was subcontracting employees or other businesses to actually do the moves, which made it very difficult for customers to track belongings.
So with the other businesses he subcontracted, did they get paid for their work, or how did he manage to do that?
Well, typically what we discovered was that he would simply place an ad on social websites such as Kijiji, for example, requesting that a driver respond, and he would typically ask that that driver own or have access to their own moving vehicle, like a large truck, for example. And he would simply put that he would require a driver from A to B, estimated X amount of hours, and he would then sift through his responses. So he would more often than not contract individuals rather than businesses to take on a specific move for him.
So what was his justification in asking for, holding the items hostage? What was his justification in asking for more money?
Good question. Interestingly, the information that we gathered in the investigation discovered that most commonly he would fabricate reasons as to why he required additional funds. One instance, for example, was he contacted a client and apologized for the shipment of those goods being late, and advised that, unfortunately, the driver and the truck have been involved in an accident. That's going to delay the shipment of your belongings, and I'm going to require another forward advance payment to help with those repairs and ensure that your belongings are on the way. Investigation into that incident discovered that there had been no accident. There was no real delay. So
you say an employee came forward. How come a customer didn't come forward to complain about what this guy was doing?
So to clarify there, the Calgary Police Service was made aware of these circumstances via that employee that came forward. However, we discovered afterwards that, to answer the second part of your question, that there were customers that had come forward, but some of those customers were from different provinces. So the Calgary Police Service just hadn't heard about them until we heard from that employee.
What kind of jail time could he potentially have?
For jail time, I can't speculate. That'll be up to the courts. Just like with everything else with an ongoing investigation, we will forward our recommendations, and then it'll be up to the Crown and the court to make a decision on that.
So everyone's property has been returned?
There was property seized during the execution of the search warrants, and all property that was recovered by the Calgary Police Service is still currently in our custody as the investigation continues. And investigators right now are painstakingly going through the property, making an effort to determine who it belongs to.
What kind of property and how much? Can you talk about that?
Certainly, there was one victim in particular made a complaint that was investigated during these circumstances of a large majority of her household belongings. So some of your typical things that you would have moved, beds, dressers, tables, chairs, things like that. In addition to that, there are documents and essentially like packing boxes. And in answer to the other previous question as well, it's those boxes that still have to be sifted through painstakingly to determine what all is there.
Is this guy known for any other, this type of, I guess, does he have a record for this type of activity or anything like that?
The individual involved in this investigation was not known to the Calgary Police prior.
Movie companies don't have the greatest reputations to start with. What does this do for the industry when this guy's doing this?
You know what? I'm glad you asked, because during the investigation, I had the opportunity to talk with some directors from the Canadian Association of Movers, as well as Better Business Bureau, Service Alberta, and some of the agencies that are in place to kind of regulate and keep an eye on what's going on. And I would agree with you that moving companies are, a lot of times they don't have a good reputation. And I believe, especially after speaking to some of those governing agencies, that it's because of circumstances like this. The reputable companies that are out there, that are family owned, that have been doing this for years and years and years, are great to deal with. But I think one of the keys that's come out of this investigation and that should be put forward, if you could, as a priority, is helping educate the public as to how they can differentiate between those quality companies that I just mentioned and the ones that you were referring to.
How rare is this type of work that Mr. London was doing, stealing these items and holding them for ransom?
Unfortunately, it's not rare at all. It is extremely frequent, and it's increasing. And it's a great question to follow up on the last one, in that the Canadian Association of Movers reports that they're literally getting overwhelmed with thousands of these from all provinces across Canada. And I was advised yesterday during a follow-up investigation that the Canadian Association of Movers has actually sent informational letter out to all the governing ministries in the provinces, just to provide an update, to let them know how frequent these are, how these sort of circumstances are impacting Canadians, and in conjunction with the last point there, how they're really, really tarnishing the reputable moving industries and making it hard for them to operate. So they are recently aware, and we are increasingly aware as well of additional police investigations that are very similar circumstances.
The 10 victims, does that include some of the drivers as well who answered the ads?
Good question, it does. Of the 10 victims, there's quite a variety. So there are victims that simply didn't get paid for a service, for example. There's victims like the one I mentioned earlier who had her belongings withheld. And there are victims that, like the original complainant, who absolutely responded to an ad for this business, entered into some form of agreement, conducted the services, and then didn't get paid.
What is about the complaint from the employee that's precipitated the Calgary Police to investigate this? If there were already cases or complaints before somebody from the company called?
Yeah, so to clarify there, there were complaints made, but again, the original complainant, who was one of the employees of the company, that was the first complaint at all that was received by the Calgary Police Service. So in answer to your question of what prompted us to investigate from that point, as the primary investigator, I would say that I was extremely lucky with the diligence and fortitude that individual demonstrated, because when I arrived to take his complaint, he was very well organized, and he had a really good amount of information that helped in my determination of if there was going to be an in-depth investigation or like is very common, I'm sure you're aware that a lot of times things like this can be labeled as a civil matter instead. The decision-making process for me was the amount of work that that complainant had done before I arrived.
Darren, can you differentiate the part between the civil and criminal?
Absolutely, that's a good point. This comes up quite a bit. We hear, or I've started to hear from people who advise that, okay, well, when I do make a complaint to the police, often what we hear is, well, that's a civil matter. You're going to have to follow a civil process. That's not a criminal matter in which the police can investigate on your behalf. And historically, I would suggest that typical disputes like this have been civil in nature. And the main point there that is going to help determine whether it's civil or criminal is the presence of a contract. So as soon as two parties enter in a contract, verbal or written or any variety, that is one of the main deciding factors in whether it's going to be looked at under the civil realm or the criminal realm. So according to the Canadian Association of Movers, they advised me that a while ago or a few years ago, there was some fairly strict regulations around moving companies, and that a lot of those have deregulated or been deregulated. As a result of that deregulation is from the last couple of years, I would say, a few years, is where we've seen an increase in this type of behavior that was being investigated in this incident. And the decision is each individual incident has to be looked at upon its merit, and then a decision has to be made of whether or not there are criminal elements present. In this particular investigation, the decision to proceed in a criminal matter came when we discovered that there was a complete lack of contracts altogether. There were none to begin with, and where there were verbal contracts in place, the employer or the business owner was grossly outside of the parameters of them.
You said these cases like this are not rare, that it happens quite often. How often do police investigate cases like this then?
I'm not certain. What I can tell you is that I'm aware of a Toronto Police Service investigation that was titled Operation Overhaul that I believe was undertaken in 2010 that had amazingly similar circumstances to the ones that we are investigating here. According to the information that I obtained from the Toronto Police Service regarding that investigation, they were also successful in apprehending an offender and in filing charges. However, I'm not certain how that turned out. So that's definitely two that I'm aware of, and I expect that they'll be increasing as the offenders, in my opinion, seem to be getting a little bit more and more bold as they gain more success in what they're doing. So that's helping us take notice of them more easily.
The Airdrie RCMP involvement, is that because of where the properties were located, the ones that were searched?
Yes, yeah. Those properties were located in Airdrie, so just as with any good partnership, we have a great relationship with the surrounding agencies, so it was just a simple contact with Airdrie to request that they assist, and they were great, applied some resources, and we worked together on that.
Are you able to say how many properties were searched?
I can. There was only two, and they were both located within Airdrie city limits.
So for a person who's moving across Canada, is there any message or anything that they could look out for?
Absolutely. I would say that there's a key message to kind of keep in mind when you're hunting for a moving company. I just made a couple of quick notes to help with that. I think the basic way is you can expect, or a consumer can expect, some basic things from a reputable company. And to name a few, typically a reputable company, when you contact them, they'll send an employee or a representative to do a cost estimate for the move, which includes an inventory of your belongings. In addition to that, they will typically provide a signed, completed contract in advance of your moving date, not the day of, not during, well before, and that contract should include all fees and costs. They're also registered with the Canadian Association of Movers. I've been advised by the directors there that they're very stringent with who they allow to become registered with them. So it will behoove clients and customers, potential customers, to look into it and see if they're registered. And the last couple are free of complaints from the Better Business Bureau, and a big one, in my personal opinion, is that the reputable companies will often, not always, but often own and operate their own fleet and have a physical work address. So if I look you up and I think that you've got a great rate listed on the internet, the way I can follow up on that is, say we're in the city of Calgary, I can swing by your address and see if it exists. If it doesn't, that's a red flag. If it exists, but there's no trucks, there's no fleet, there's nothing there, that's another red flag that people could be aware of. Conversely, things that they need to look out for that we're discovering through investigation are typical of some of these companies. People are often behind the 8 ball from the beginning because, as we all know, moves can happen very quickly and there's a time constraint. But I would encourage people to think of the amount of time that they need to take to show due diligence as a way of protecting, their worldly possessions, their lifetime of memories, and all those things that they're trying to move. So if you think of it in that perspective, a couple hours here or there to do a brief investigation is probably worth it. So take the time to shop around. Check online with the Canadian Movers Association, the Better Business Bureau, and a big one is to pay a close attention to the finer details of the contract, because we've also seen such minor inconsistencies as someone that shows up with a contract for you to sign. They'll just do a sleight of hand and they'll pass it forward to you like this, please sign here. Meanwhile, they've covered up all the hidden fees and everything, and you're in a rush and you're not sure what you've signed. So be sure that you get a copy of the contract and you read the details.
Do you have an approximate value of everything, all the property involved, as well as the goods and services that weren't paid for?
Investigators are still sifting through everything to determine, as far as the property, what the values of everything are. At this date, I can say that the estimate right now is between about $50,000 and $60,000.
Darren, can you talk about that one victim? Just give him an idea of like the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So in deciding, when police agencies are deciding civil versus criminal, I believe that it is a good idea to consider, well, what has been the impact of the actions that are being investigated. So in conjunction with my earlier comment about the one victim in regards to the Calgary investigation who was missing an entire variety of household belongings, that was an extremely difficult time for her. Because she spent the entire Christmas holidays with almost no furnishings in her home. She's got 2 daughters. Everyone was sleeping on air mattresses, and they were having a difficult time, just getting by over the holidays. In conjunction with that, she also informed me that lack of peace of mind and not knowing if she's going to get her things or if she's going to get any money back, it also adds a certain amount of stress that she had a very difficult time with. So luckily, the positive note there is she was able to get in contact with us, and we had already begun the investigation, so it worked out.